exciting to come and actually speak in our largest market. It's wonderful to kind of continue to be part of the Web Summit. I got an opportunity to speak at one of the very first ones out in Dublin, almost like 5 years ago now. And it's, the organization has gone a long way since then. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the company that we started back in 2008 and some progress that we've made to date. I generally like framing the story around the genesis of the business. The work came from actually this fear of needles for me. So I worked at a hospital in rural Kenya, and I had this issue where I was helping out with IT, and we had these rural nurses come and ask me to give blood because they ran out of blood at their local blood bank. And when I did this over a period of time, they kept asking for more and more blood. I started looking into what the problem was with the blood supply levels in rural Kenya, and it came down to latency. So we built this little SMS platform. This is like 2007. Where we enabled rural nurses across Kenya to be able to text in what the day's blood supply levels were. And we built this just beautiful front-end visualization to show kind of in real time what the blood supply levels were across Kenya, and more importantly, like where blood was needed in the country. And when we launched this system, there's a picture of me shaking hands with the Minister of Health. We felt very proud of ourselves for kind of solving this problem and enabling it such that we wouldn't have to, or at least I wouldn't have to be kind of giving blood on a regular basis because they kept running out of blood at the local blood bank. The challenge with this model was that 2 weeks after we had launched it, about half the nurses in Kenya stopped texting in the data. And by the end of the first month, virtually no one was using this system anymore. And ultimately, it was deemed a failure. And it failed not because of any technical shortcoming. I mean, technically, this thing was bulletproof. It failed because of a fundamental lack of insight on my part. And that lack of insight had to do with the price of data, the price of an SMS. What I failed to realize with this, by sending an SMS every single day, those rural nurses in Kenya, that represents a fairly substantial fraction of a rural nurse's day's wage. But those rural nurses in Kenya were essentially asked to take a pay cut in order to participate with our system, and that was kind of something that wasn't really fair. So we built this system that essentially credited the rural nurse with about 10 Kenyan shillings, enough to cover the cost of the SMS and like a penny to say thank you. And literally, for that opportunity to earn like 1 cent worth of free airtime, we had all of these nurses across Kenya re-engage with our platform. And it's something that's now rolled out across East Africa as a mechanism to collect data about rural hospitals. But more importantly, a switch flip with the carriers. Because suddenly, the carriers saw that instead of trying to squeeze more money out of that rural woman's pocket in Kenya, they could start squeezing money from the Ministry of Health. So the mobile operators got on board with this platform as a mechanism to increase what's called ARPU, average revenue per user. And ultimately, that led me to leave MIT and start this company. And the genesis was literally 20 lines of Python. So I think, hopefully one of the takeaways here is that, interesting company ideas can start from very little. So we wrote these 20 lines of Python that credited these rural nurses, and then we started integrating this script into the back-end billing system of other mobile operators across emerging markets. The short story is if you fast forward to today, now like 8 or 9 years later, we've integrated this piece of technology, and it's now more than 20 lines, but we've integrated into the back-end billing systems of 311 mobile carriers globally. We're live in 93 countries, and we can provide connectivity now to 4.56 billion prepaid subs on network today. There is no other company that has even an order of magnitude close to this kind of reach. It is truly unprecedented. And what's striking now is, well, what do we do with this? And for us, we've thought a lot about different mechanisms for monetization, but the core premise for why we started this in the first place was to provide connectivity, to get people onto the internet. And I think what's interesting about emerging markets, and India is no exception here, is that while the price of Android phones are pretty low, the data costs are still quite high relative to the aggregate population's typical income. So, this is an example of Carla. She actually lives in Indonesia, but she has a Micromax handset. I think it was about $80. She, like a large fraction of mobile phone subscribers in these markets, spends anywhere between 5 to 8% of her day's wage on connectivity. And the carriers know they can't get that number to 10%, right? They're already getting as much money as they realistically can out of these subscribers. And yet they're desperate to try to figure out, how do you increase ARPU? So how can the carriers make more money from someone like Carla, who's already giving so much money already, paying for the internet? And from Carla's perspective, she'd love to consume more data, but she knows that there's this implicit cost. So she uses WhatsApp, she uses Facebook, she watches some videos on YouTube, but not very many, because she's throttling herself because of the cost of data. And right now there's over 1 billion people in emerging markets carrying around Android phones today. In 4 years, it's going to be, by 2020, it's going to be almost 3 billion. And the data consumption, the amount of data that people like Carla consumes, that's going to go up by 6x. So Carla is going to be spending even more money on data than she is today, which is challenging given the fact of the unit economics of the operator business. I've been working with carriers for now 15 years. And these guys, I mean, they know their unit economics very well. And they know that they're going to be increasingly struggling to cater to those 3 billion Carlas out there to provide them with enough data, given the ARPU, given the ability to pay, essentially. And so if you start looking at where else you can find money, like if you wanted to give the next billion people unrestricted free internet, someone has to foot the bill. And it's not going to be the carriers. But if you look at just the sheer amount of money being spent on even just advertising, this year alone, there's going to be over $200 billion being spent on advertising in emerging markets. That number is going to go to $300 billion by 2020. If you couple that with like e-commerce, you can get to a ludicrously high number. And these are just numbers for emerging markets. So there's just this giant pile of money out there. And the $300 billion being spent on advertising, right? Today, it's going into the pockets of the people who own television channels in Delhi, right? Or the billboards out of Lagos, or the radio stations in Sao Paulo. They're going to, like, that $300 billion is going to the 1% of the 1% of the 1%. And from my perspective, I think there's a real opportunity here. An opportunity to redirect that $300 billion away from the people who own the TV channels or the radio stations and directly into the pockets of the very consumers that these global brands are trying to reach. And that's what we're trying to do with Jana and MSent, is to be able, from my perspective, it's wealth redistribution on an unprecedented scale, and at the same time being able to provide unrestricted connectivity to 1 billion people. The reason why this hasn't, the reason why all of this money is going into the billboards or the TV is because mobile advertising right now in these markets is fundamentally broken, right? The amount of money being spent, whether that's with Google or Facebook or with us or with any ad networks, it's peanuts compared to 1950s style marketing technologies like billboards or radio or TV. And I think it has a lot to do with the fact that when you see, an Amazon ad in your Facebook newsfeed, for example, a lot of consumers in these markets, they know that just took money out of their pocket. Because the consumer is paying for every bite, when you load up that advertisement, that just suddenly made the consumer a little bit poor. If you accidentally touch on that ad in the newsfeed, you lose even more money. And so that's one of the things that we're trying to do is figure out a way to offset that, because that's very similar to the issues with the nurses, right? By asking them to take a pay cut in order to engage with our blood bank platform, it has a lot of parallels to Amazon asking a typical consumer to take a pay cut in order to try their product, or any advertiser for that matter. So we launched MSent at the end of 2014 with this idea of being able to provide advertisers a mechanism to engage with consumers in a way where the consumer can earn free internet. And what's striking is how quickly this is scaled. right? So we were pre-revenue pretty much until we launched this thing. We were just building infrastructure around the world. And when we launched our app, originally we launched it in India first, and then we rolled it out in Indonesia, Brazil. We're going to be rolling out in China actually next quarter. And the growth has been phenomenal. And it's not because MSent's particularly polished, actually. Like, MSent needs a lot of work. The reason why we're now one of the fastest growing mobile apps in history is because there's 1.3 billion Carlas out there. There's billion people who are struggling to be able to afford data and yet have a low-cost Android phone. And Carla, I mean, she has alternatives to getting free internet access. The biggest one was Facebook's Free Basics and Internet.org. I was in Barcelona on Monday, talking about the unit economics of our business and essentially the importance of net neutrality right before Mark Zuckerberg was speaking. And it's interesting to kind of look at the different types of models that one can do to provide connectivity to the masses. The real difference for us is the fact that we're not asking the operators to foot the bill. What we're doing is we're going after the $200 billion being spent on advertising and using that money to basically pay for the internet. And by doing that, we can afford to provide unrestricted internet access. So when we give someone 50 rupees or 50 megabytes worth of internet, those 50 megabytes can be used for anything. They can be used to do a Google search. They can be used to go to a website. They can be used to watch a video or download any app they want. It's truly unrestricted. And frankly, that's the reason why we have so many more users and so much more reach than an internet.org. One of the other things that I think was striking about this kind of explosive growth that we've had with our app is that because we haven't spent anything on advertising, it's spread all through word of mouth. So if you look at an MSent user, the tip in their address book, 1 out of every 5 people in their address book on their phone are also MSent users. So the average MSent user has 27 friends in their phone book that also use MSent, just because like this spreads via word of mouth. And what's amazing is that you can start now leveraging this kind of relatively dense social graph to add even more value. So it was part of a hackathon project at the end of last year where one of our engineers enabled people like Carla to, when she earns 50 megabytes of data, give her the opportunity to gift like 25 megabytes to her friend or family member somewhere else. 10 weeks after we launched that particular service, we had over $10 million of internet getting gifted across the world. And this is because there's this real demand to be able to start not only getting connectivity for themselves, but being able to provide connectivity for their friends. And I can walk through a couple of other examples, but what is striking is just that how much of a need this ultimately is. And I think that it is, I think I've sounded increasingly less naive about how you can provide unrestricted internet access in a way that is not only scalable but profitable in these high-growth emerging markets. I mean, when we started this company back in 2008, when we were out fundraising, this type of model was greeted with a lot of skepticism. You're going to become a billion-dollar business by essentially giving away a free service to some of the poorest regions in the world. Like, why are you on Sand Hill Road trying to raise capital? We've now raised nearly $100 million. We are the largest provider of free internet globally. And it's exciting to be able to start going back to the people that we've been telling the story to over the last 8 or 9 years and really show that, like, hey, this is possible. And you don't get many opportunities in life to be able to make an impact at this scale. But I think we truly will be able to get 1 billion people free, unrestricted internet access in the next 4 years. And that is pretty awesome. So with that, thank you. And thank you for clapping.